All right, I guess we'll get started. Well, welcome, folks. My name is Gianna. I'm one of the reference librarians here at the Chelmsford Public Library. So tonight we're hosting a genealogy program, creating a living autobiography, um, a grandfather's living autobiography, and we're going to be exploring My Heritage's Deep Story. Which is a groundbreaking new AI-based tool which enables your family history to come alive. Built upon their previous photo enhancement and colorization tools, MyHeritage has added very realistic animation and audio, allowing your ancestors to tell their own personalized stories. You can edit and expand the basic narrative, and by adding photographs, maps, and other graphics, provide context in time and place. If you have struggled with attempts to provide a fun and easy way to reach out to family members, DeepStory's simple template creates an exciting and unique product to document, preserve, and share your most treasured family memories. So tonight's presenter is Linda MacIver. Linda is an educator, lecturer, librarian, and genealogy researcher. She recently retired from a 27-year career at the Boston Public Library, where she inaugurated the BPL patron genealogy classes, teaching the multi-week beginner's course for 5 years. She organized 2 popular seasons of the local and family history series and developed the intermediate genealogy summer lecture series. Linda is the former secretary and civil records director for federal records for the Massachusetts Genealogical Council and a member of the Massachusetts Society of Genealogists and the Essex, Massachusetts Society of Genealogists. She also serves as the New England representative for the Essex, England Records Office. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Linda to start tonight's presentation.
Thanks, Gianna, and thanks, of course, the Chelmsford Friends of the Library who have invited me back. This is my 3rd time with Chelmsford. I'm very happy to be back. I have tried to portray in the title slide here how our research with some graphics sent through an AI product produces a deep story. My Heritage explains it as a short video biography of an ancestor telling his or her story. DeepStory makes family photos speak and can be created by a deceased individual for whom there are enough details in your family tree to create a rich story. I think it is helpful, though, to actually see it, so you have an idea of the end product before I discuss the details of how to actually create it. This is a short 1.5-minute example that My Heritage uses in its promos. Here we go.
I am Charlotte Kowalski. Growing up in West Australia in the 50s was awesome. I reckon my best memories have to involve the Christmas season. Every year we would pile into the car and drive from Perth to Bunbury for a 1-week stay at the house of my Granny Paulina, or as all of us called her, our Babchi. The minute she opened the door, the strong scent of her jasmine perfume surrounded us. We loved it, it was almost intoxicating. She would fill our pockets with lollies and send us off to play with the rest of our cousins. Soon after, we would all switch to bathers and head to the beach to build our traditional sand Santa and spot bottlenose dolphins in the ocean. When Christmas dinner time arrived, the table was chock-a-block with Polish dishes, but all we kids ever wanted to eat was snags on the barbie. I remember everyone was talking, laughing and having a good time. After dinner, Barbji would go around the room smelling like a bouquet of jasmines, with a plate of panchki in her hand. Each person would take one donut and make a wish out loud. Every single time, I wished that next year will be exactly the same. But Barbji died in 1961. So, once I got married and had a family of my own, every year at Christmas time I made sure to buy heaps of jasmine flowers, to let the scent fill my house and carry my most precious childhood memories with them.
To me, DeepStory is a rather simple product that allows us to create animated versions of our ancestors' photos with our chosen ancestor narrating his or her own story. The speech and the movements that you've seen exhibited in the previous one are generated and mapped to the photos using AI technology. You may need a little backstory as to why I like this so much and why perhaps you will feel to some extent and for the same reasons you may like it as well. Unlike some genealogists who I know who seem to have been born with a silver spoon, genealogy silver spoon, um, I had absolutely no background in genealogy when I left the corporate library information services world to work for the first time in the government documents department at this beautiful research library of the Boston Public Library. I did fairly quickly, however, learn that any resource that placed an ancestor in a specific place at a specific time, like voter lists and all types of federal, state, and local maps, were important resources for genealogists who made their way into the government documents department. Within a few years, I was upstairs working in the social sciences department in Bates Hall, a department responsible for 26 subject areas, including local and family history, and dozens of mailed in genealogy requests per month. It was 1995. By the early 2000s, I was teaching a 12-week beginner's genealogy course for the BPL public. And after retiring from the BPL, I continued teaching around the metro area and southern New Hampshire, as I still do. What was almost always consistent in the classes was that the biggest request was always, teach us how to hop the pond, even before they knew what a passenger manifest was or a census record. It was at that point that I realized that I had shared very little of what I knew about the MacIvers arriving in this side of the pond. I certainly wasn't getting any younger. What could I do? Well, there are family trees. Colorful. This one's cute. Good for the children, but kind of boring and not all that informative. Private Facebook page, just for us. A little better, but I was doing most of the posting. Write a book about our Scots, but already done. So I needed to do something exciting, though, if I was going to hook any of my family, especially the younger ones. So I gave myself a project. It was a self-imposed project to hook my younger relatives. Of course, most of my relatives are now younger than me, but I would at least focus on some of those up-and-coming younger relatives in the family. And this was my who, what, when, where, why, and how process that I was going to use. The who, one ancestor story. The what, DeepStory's animated videos, an expansion of what they had originally produced called Deep Nostalgia, that they announced in 2021 as an animation tool. When was I going to do it? ASAP. Time was flying. Where? On my Heritage's photos column. Why? It would force me to do the research, first of all, to start thinking outside the box to accomplish the goal that I wanted to reach in finding folks in the family. And the how, I would use one of the shortest instruction pages ever. And this is it. You do not have to be a my Heritage subscriber. However, you must have a tree on my Heritage. You can sign up, have a free account, so it's a free tree. Or if you already have a tree in some other system, you can import your GEDCOM into the MyHeritage process. Your narrator must be on that tree. No living narrators are preferred. They don't It's not prohibited, but they encourage you. If you're going to use a living person, obviously get permission from them. But basically, the tool is made for a narrator who is deceased. The best narrator photo should be front-facing and straight. Download the media that will help you tell the story, starting with your photos. Tag as many people in the photos as possible with the new photo tagger, which is included for free also. And just recently, they introduced a date tagger, and we'll take a look at both of those. Use the MyHeritage tools to, first of all, enhance your photos, and then, if you want, colorize the desired photos that you want to use in your story. Add additional media under the photos umbrella, but they don't have to just be photos. They can be maps, charts, newspaper articles, pictures, pretty much anything that you can digitize and upload. So let's start with the MyHeritage homepage and mouse over Photos and click on My Photos, where you will see what I have already uploaded. And as you can see, it's not just strictly photos. We've got some newspaper articles, portraits, screenshots from books, and a miscellaneous amount of things. The yellow arrow points to the upload button, and that's how you upload the photos that you're interested in. That page takes you to this one where you can either drag photos into the rectangular box as outlined, or you can select files from your computer or wherever your file locations are. Next step is to start tagging as many of the people in your photos as you can, step by step, so that the system can find them for your story. The same process is basically used in social media like Facebook, as we tag our Facebook people. So when you click on the process, move the little square to the people's faces or in the area of the people's faces, and you will be able to identify that person. And you can see here that they have recognized that this is my uncle, and that, of course, comes from the tree that's already in the system. From the same page, you can have several other functions all at the same time. Over on the left side with the three buttons here, you want to start over, you didn't really like this photo, we're going to go look for another one, just delete it. Sometimes we upload pictures and they're not in the proper rotation, so you can do that. You can also repair pictures that may be torn or have some real damage to them. This is also a free part of the system. Over here are the buttons for doing further work with your pictures, enhancing them, cleaning them up, clearing them up, colorizing them if you desire, and animating them, which used to be a separate part of the system because DeepStory itself has animation built into the service. So this is a quick look at enhancing and gives you a little comparison here between the after as well as the before look. The colorizing process, should you want to do that, also shows you the before black and white version and the color version next to it. It does not eliminate your original photo. It is always still there. And should you continue to want to use just the black and white, that's perfectly fine too. You have the choice in whichever process you want to install. How accurate is colorization? Well, that's debatable, and it's really hard to tell because if we don't know what the original picture might have shown us, it's difficult to tell how accurate it is. But it's a wonderful tool that we have. I think colorizing often creates greater detail, easier detail in the pictures. And I have a feeling from this example, and I can tell you because I saw my mother's bridal gown, and this is my mom. Her bridal gown was pink, very light pink. So it's only an assumption on my part, but I would imagine that the algorithms build in as well an understanding of types of events. And I would gather that the algorithms know or can judge that this is a wedding. And 90% of the time, at least in these uh, years gone by, most brides were in white, and therefore, the guess by the system is that they were both in white, that the men were probably both in black, although it could certainly have been dark brown or dark blue. Um, it's like anything else in genealogy. It may help to do some further research. If you find a newspaper article about the wedding, it's most likely going to describe the bride's outfit, as well as perhaps the groom's. There are two parts listed here, the animate photos and the AI time machine, that aren't really designed to be used in DeepStory, but they existed before DeepStory. Now, as I mentioned, the animation capability is embedded in the DeepStory process, but you could still use it to animate an individual photo if you want to, which is what it was originally released to do. And you can see this is not a motion picture for you, but she is moving her head and she would be blinking her eyes and those kinds of things as they use the animation tool. The other one is the AI time machine. It almost broke the genealogy internet world when it was announced. Everyone was on MyHeritage doing time travel back. And the reason it was is that it was, number one, very easy to do. All you had to do was select up to 25 photos of the same person that you wanted to have time traveling happen to, usually ourselves, but could be other people, as long as they were pictures of the same person. So the tips were, we recommend choosing existing photos from your camera roll or your computer because you want good clarity and good quality. Also, showing only this person and no one else in the picture made it much more easy to use and a better picture result. Selfies were really good for this process, and take them on different days, showing a wide range of expressions of the person that you're doing this with. There were a couple no-nos, no photos of minors, and no nudity or swimsuit photos. So knowing all of that and putting your pictures all in the system, I first chose, I wanted to see a Victorian theme. Well, that's partly because I live in a 1872 brownstone in the Back Bay, Boston. I don't think I really wanted to be a Victorian brownstone owner back then, but this is my Victorian look. But who wouldn't want to be in a Van Gogh presentation? This looked like much more fun. But I think my real calling in this time travel was to my Celtic roots. And probably I should think about posting some of these on the clan page, and maybe some of the rest of the clan will kick in and join the fun. So we're almost ready in terms of what you have to do, which isn't a whole lot. The one other major thing you can do is actually change the language. Um, and of course, you can do this anytime. We usually have it set on English as English speakers. But because the system is worldwide in use, there are other languages that you can just switch the language selector at the top of the screen in the home page if you want the narrator in this system to speak another language. Or if you want them to speak English, but with their native language accent, there is a way to do that. It's not built into the system, but there is a trick that you can use, and I'll show you that in a little minute. So 42 languages, it's pretty much going to cover a lot of the world, but they're still looking for volunteers to help them add more. And every now and then you see a new language added to the system. So we've picked our language, and basically we're all set to create the story. That's it. That's my simple instruction sheet. So we go back to the home page again, and under Photos, down to Deep Story, and click on Deep Story. Now, they will always suggest some possibilities, and they take this just from your tree. They'll throw some names up from your tree that they think you might want to use. Now, of course, it's your decision. And some of the pictures, I picked some particularly bad ones because these were blow up shots from bigger group photos. So, of course, by the time they got blown up for this part of this part of the way my heritage was showing it to you, they weren't in good shape. So obviously, you can go in to your what you've uploaded for pictures and choose what you want. So if we'd gone over to Uncle Walter again, we could have clicked right on this and then gone into the system and had them create Uncle Walter's story. I decided to pick my father as my test example. I wanted something that wasn't going to be very long, and just looking back one generation and being a single child and not married, there wasn't a whole lot of story to tell um, between my father and my generation. So I picked him as the example. They expected it to take 3 to 4 minutes to create the deep story. I think it was more like 2 to 3 minutes because there just wasn't a whole lot there. Over here in motion, you will see the little scribe here actually writing the deep story. So it's very realistic in the sense that, yes, it's sitting there and the template or the program is actually writing your deep story. So in a couple of minutes, you don't have to sit there watching it. You can go off and do some other things because it's going to send you an email when it's finished, and then you can go back and check it. If you just love it, which is really good, if you really love it at the beginning, you can just immediately share it in all the normal ways that we share most things these days. Or you can download it. Think about what you may want to do with it later. But typically, most of us will click on this one because after watching the deep story, click here. You can change the text, the photos, or the voice. You can pretty much edit the whole process. So editing the results, you can add or subtract the narration. You can add more media. You can change the voice or the voice speed. You can choose a voice. There are 152 choices. We talked about the fact that you can choose 42 languages for the narrator. And you can hear the test samples as you change any of these things that are related to the voice. You can have it will play back the change so that instead of having to have it recreate each time you make a voice change or a major change, you can actually hear the changes and accept them if they're okay. So going into the edit mode with my father's deep story, this is what it looks like. So your voice options are up here. This is the narration that the system created. I didn't create any of the text materials. That's what it does. If you want to let it take a stab at it, it will go and do that. And basically, since it's taking information from your tree, it is going to be a lot of statistical information. I was born here. I was born on this date. My father was such and such. My mother was such and such, and their dates, and they were married, such and such. It's pretty straightforward. Unlike the unlike the first example that you saw, where she created, I would guess that that one was created from scratch, um, not using the template other than to set up the process per se. This is how, when you change any of the text, you can click hear it and it will play back the text for you to see how things like the pronunciation are. This works best if you type out whole numbers and dates, because the system is reading, and it just works better if you do that. You can add in between any of these. So just click on the plus sign here, and you can add, and add a whole new chapter in there, and add some new text, and add some video, add some visuals there. And if you didn't like the way they had produced the animation of the photo, change the photo if you want. Any of those can all be done as part of the edit procedure. This is what the voice options look like. They will just list the options by language, so that if it's English, it will let you choose whether you want the Irish version of English or one of the several possible choices for an American sounding narrator. And of course, there are male and female and children narrators that have a one or couple of choices, I think. At this point, once you've seen what you're basically working with, this is the point at which I thought about it might be time to make a storyboard. Doesn't have to be great detail, but just kind of decide the visuals you want to use based upon what kind of narration you want to add once you've seen what the editing looks like, or what the original version has been sent back to you. I would strongly recommend that, but it's not required, of course. There's a lot of other help features at this point that you might want to take a look at, especially this is fairly very long overview of starting the whole process. It's in the knowledge base section, which is really their help section. They call it their knowledge base. So this is one I would definitely look at. And this is where you find the cool trick for giving your ancestor a foreign accent. In other words, he's going to speak in English, but he's going to speak with a foreign accent. And I'll show you one of those in a minute too. So your handout, which should be in the chat, I hope, or will be before the end of the presentation, has a link to the knowledge base and to a couple of the more significant sections of it. As you probably figured out, my choice of the theme that I was going to do for the more lengthy deep story that I was going to do was on immigration. But you have all kinds of possibilities. Whatever theme you want can be used as a deep story, just as we saw the first short one. She decided to recall the special parts of her Christmases growing up. But you might want, and this brings in a lot of the family, I think, if you have a family-owned business that's been in the family for decades, and might even bring in two parts of the family in some cases, this can really bring in some interest in it, because People may have known some of the members of the family, the more recent ones. Um, but if the younger folks don't, they can trace back where that family started, where that family business started, how it evolved. Is it still there? Who's running it now? Who are the important people in the family, in that family business? Or you may want to take a look at the locations of your families, especially if there were major changes in the geographic area. Folks who emigrated from especially eastern parts of Europe and the changes that World War I and World War II brought. This would be an interesting way to show them the immigration steps, the hardships that the families may have gone through over decades. And how can we ever talk about family without talking about food? Showing recipes, highlighting recipes is a great way to do that. And I love the way this example also explained where this recipe came from, whose recipe it was. Um, and whose possession it was in now, if you wanted to actually potentially see more recipes that might have been owned or might have been done by Tina. So it's really difficult not to talk about Christmases, as we saw in the early example, or any of the holidays without talking about food and family and community. And it's a great topic, as we saw earlier. Toys are another terrific topic. I think especially to interest the younger folks. What were toys like for children 40 and 50 years ago when you actually held them or kicked them or, had a closer connection with our special toys and not just have them on the screen. So whether it's the model cars or model railroads for the guys and some of us girls, or the dolls for the rest of us. It's a great story. Who had those toys? How long did they have them? Are they still in the family? Are they in good shape? There's so much to tell about that theme. And then, of course, our entertainment life, social clubs, the women's clubs, the men's clubs, the music venues that we went to, how we traveled to some of those places. So a lot of ideas before I actually show you Evander's one. So as you won't get too confused before it even starts, although you probably won't be surprised to hear that there is more than one Evander in this Obey the Scottish Naming Patterns family. The voice that you hear is Evander, my grandfather. He's the narrator. But the first Evander he discusses is my second great grandfather, Evander. So just to help you understand that part. I have two questions I'd like to ask you, and if you would use the chat to respond to them, I'd like to hear your responses. The first question is, if you have ever attended my presentations called Demystifying the Big Three Free Databases, Internet Archive, Digital Commonwealth, and the Digital Public Library of America, much of the research and the visuals came from resources from those free databases that I use in the DeepStory here. In other words, this DeepStory content and the product is basically free of charge. See if you can identify the one main exception in the DeepStory that would have cost me money. And the second question, at the end of Evander's story, he signs off. It is, however, in the presentation for tonight, it's followed by two photos and two little addendums beyond his sign-off that could continue the story, or they could be separated, started in a new deep story, and begin a new deep story on the new mention of a city that they've moved to. So the question here is, what would you do? How important is the length of the deep story to how successful it may be? And if you would enter your responses to either or both, hopefully, of those questions in the chat, we'll take a look at them at the end. So here is Evander.
Hello, I'm Evander MacIver. Let me tell you my story. My story started on January 11, 1884 in Quebec, Canada. I was named after my grandfather, Evander, who was born in 1808 on a wee island, called Pebay-Moor, barely off the coast of the Isle of Lewis, in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. He was a fisherman at first until he married my grandmother, Henrietta, nicknamed Effie, Campbell, and they settled at Reef as tenant farmers called crofters. My grandparents were raising 7 children by the time the potato famine hit the Hebrides in the 1840s, and the highland clearances, designed to increase pastoral land for raising more sheep, forced them off the land in Reef. On Lewis, the harvesting of peat during the spring and summer provided fuel for the cold winters, but the boggy peat lands also reduced farm land for the crofters. The owner of the Isle of Lewis, Sir James Matheson, moved my family by 1851 to an agricultural experiment in Dean's Ton, that attempted to improve the boggy peat land by bringing sand over from Reef. Native horses, the beautiful Eriskay ponies, with boards strapped to their feet so they could work on the waterlogged ground, laid the sand. The experiment failed. 2 more children were born while in Dean's Ton. The journey from Reef to Dean's Ton was only about 30 miles, but it was the beginning of decades of change for my emigrant family. About all that remains of the 80 acres reclamation scheme in Dean's Ton is a stone monument with a plaque. Unlike the uncaring landlords of some of the other isles, Sir Matheson, however, received mixed reviews for assisting almost 2,000 of his tenants to emigrate to Canada between 1851 and 1855. My father, Neil MacIver, was born in Reef in 1845, and was 9 years old in 1855, when Matheson sent the whole family from Scotland to the eastern townships of Quebec province, near Lake Magantic. They sailed from the western coast of Lewis in July, on the ship Melissa, a 652-ton, 3-masted vessel, square-rigged on all 3 masts, captained by Master Reed, with 330 passengers. Despite Lloyd's quality rating for the ship, crossing the Atlantic in a sailing ship was always going to be a perilous undertaking, with discomforts and anxious moments. One can only imagine what the more than 6-week passage on a cargo ship must have been like. And how heartbreaking it was, to leave behind forever, beautiful, Bourg Bay. A newspaper article in the Inverness Courier on July 11, 1855, recorded their departure on the ship, Melissa. The newspaper account suggested the optimism of the 330 souls of the better sort of tenants, seemingly well adapted for the hardships of a settler's life. Late accounts from their friends in Canada rendered many of the people most desirous to depart and share the prosperity of those who went before them. One of Scotland's most noted artists of this period, John Fade, is said to have done for Scottish art what Robert Burns did for Scottish song. He portrays something quite different from the newspaper account. His touching painting called The Last of the Clan depicts an emigrant vessel that has just carried away the strong men yet able to make a fortune, leaving behind the feeble man and tearful granddaughter, the last of the clan, who possess not a single blade of grass in the glen that was once all their own. How emotional it must have been for my family looking back from their ship's deck. The Quebec Mercury newspaper of August 21, 1855, reported the arrival of the ship, Melissa. She left the Hebrides on July 7 and arrived at the port of Quebec on August 20, 1855, a voyage of 45 days. There would still be a continuing journey to reach the eastern townships. They settled in Spring Hill, in the township of Whitton, Quebec Province. The first Canadian census shows that by 1861 there were 46 Scottish families there. From the 1820s to 1855, many displaced Hebridean crofters were the frontier settlers who cleared the land, and built the log cabins and roads of southeastern Quebec. My mother Annie MacDonald was born in 1849 in Scotland. Neil and Annie married in 1875 and farmed the land for more than 4 decades. I had 9 brothers and sisters, Marianne, Effie, Donald, Malcolm, Christine, Mary, Anne, and Catherine. Richard Lambert was adopted. We had such a wonderful large family. Both Evander and Effie passed away in the 1890s. They are buried with hundreds of other Hebridean emigrants in the Winslow Presbyterian Cemetery, in Stornoway, Quebec. My parents made the decision to emigrate for a second time, this time crossing the border into the beautiful White Mountains of New Hampshire, USA, in May of 1900. We settled in a small town called Whitefield until tragedy struck. Just 6 months after our arrival, my father was killed by a Boston and Maine train as he walked home from town on the tracks, that December. He, and later Annie, and 3 of my siblings rest in peace in the Pine Street Whitefield Cemetery. A few years later, we moved down the road to Littleton where there were more employment opportunities. In 1906 I became a naturalized citizen of the United States of America, a very proud day. In Whitefield, on the 4th of July of that same year, at age 22, I took Mabel Alice Fry, the love of my life, to be my wife. These were the happiest moments of my life. Mabel was born in 1885, in Littleton. She was 20 years old when we married, 2 years younger than me. We had 7 wonderful children, George, Freeman, Neil, Christine, Luella, Charlotte and Francis. All our children were born in Littleton, New Hampshire. The first 3 children all came at once in 1907. Yes, triplets born at my in-laws' house and the first triplets ever recorded in Littleton. Mabel always dressed them alike, probably didn't help out their teachers much. They were a handful. 4 sisters followed. By 1920, they were all in school, and this MacIver clan was complete. When the boys left school, they worked in some of the grand White Mountain hotels of the era, including the Upland Terrace, getting their start in the restaurant and hotel service industries. The clan grew up on High Street in Littleton, with Grandma Annie living beside us in the smaller home. Mabel and I had 7 lovely grandchildren. From our son George we had Linda. We had William and Robert from our son Freeman. We had Norman, Richard, Donald and David from our daughter Charlotte. We had Lois and Marilyn from our daughter Frances. We lost Mabel much too soon in 1929 at age 44. Soon after, I moved the whole family to Manchester, New Hampshire and met the Arlen family, who would from that point on, play a major role in the MacIver family. We had many good times together including beach days at Varney Point near Weirs Beach on Lake Winnipesaukee. I'm so glad I got to share my story with you. Thanks so much for watching. In 1932, my oldest daughter, Christine, known as Tina, married Walter Arlen, the first event that brought the families together. Then in 1941, one of my triplet sons, George, married Vera Arlen, Walter's youngest sister.
So that's Evander's story with the 2 items added at the end, which if you want to comment on, that would be great. So when it finishes, when the system finishes creating the DeepStory, it comes back and you still have a bunch of choices. You can immediately share it if you like the way it looks at that point. You can download it and keep the original on your computer system itself. If it's really bad, you could just delete it and start over again. Or you can go into the edit process that we took a look at. Now, before we go into chat for your and to take your questions, I thought you might like to see that trick about having a basic foreign language speaker trying to speak English with his accent. Now, granted, my father was not Italian, so it might sound a little bit different if if he was Italian to begin with. But this is an Italian version speaking English.
Hi, I'm Donald MacIver. I would like you to know a little bit about my life. My story started when I was born on May 19, 1907 in Littleton, New Hampshire. My father Evander MacIver was born in 1884 in Quebec.
That's probably enough example of that. But I want to point out, in addition to the things that you have listed on your handbook, and most of them, there are links to most of everything that I've mentioned so far. There are a few other things, especially some more information on photo tagging, because they have added a mobile app possibility for that to happen. And the new product, which is their photo data product, they describe it as the product being trained to understand nuances such as clothing, hairstyles, unique furniture, and other objects that are characteristic of the particular decade. Date estimates are valuable clues that we can further your family history research. I did try it on one of the photos that you have seen in Evander's DeepStory. You may remember it was 1920 that that it was described for. It was around the 1920 census. They estimated it at 1950. I'm not sure why that happened, because a couple of other ones that I did that I tried estimates on were considerably closer than this one was. So like anything in genealogy, we always need to do more research. So checking further on some that you don't think are accurate may help to get closer to the real date, hopefully. In closing, I'd like to point out a few things that are usual questions before we finish the presentation anyway. So I'll just give you the answers to some of those questions before you have to ask them. There is currently no charge for subscribers or for non-subscribers to use all of this, including all the capabilities in modifying the pictures and doing the colorization and all of that. It's all free. There's currently no limit to the length of the video. The one that you saw for Evander was 8.5 minutes long. The original first one was 1.5 minutes. There is currently no limit on the number of videos for subscribers. Non-subscribers can create several, and they have never defined what several means, which typically we would think is at least 3, but you probably won't know until you try to do the one that is no longer being allowed to be free. So for free, and are then encouraged to subscribe once you reach that limit. There is currently no option to upload custom voice files and no way to kind of feel the emotion. A couple of the comments, you would like to have Evander kind of snickering or laughing because they're supposed to be funny, but there's no way that that is built into the system. You have to try to indicate it with the terminology that you use. There is no pre-programmed, quote, voice option for speaking English with the accent. And that's where the trick has to be used in order to produce that. There is no way to build in a pause for the viewer to read a lengthy chapter, or for part of that newspaper article. You of course can, when you're doing it yourself, you can pause it anytime so that you can read it. But there's no way built into the system to like slow it down other than to continually slow down the voice, which would be about the only way to do it. But then you sort of begin to stretch out the voice not so naturally as you want to hear it. Phonetically spell some words if the narrator mispronounces to your taste. So when you are writing the text, misspell the words to get as close to the actual pronunciation, or as close to the way you want it pronounced. Like Uig Bay, was originally kind of mutilated in spelling it the way it's spelled. So you try it phonetically and see if that works. You could have multiple narrators, but you would have to video edit with your own software. It is designed to use with historical photos. Please ask permission of using photos of living people. Deep stories are not shared with any third parties. Do not worry about anything happening to those photos either. Privacy and ownership is protected when you use the DeepStory product. So there is also a fairly detailed FAQ within the system, especially if you're interested in more of how this technology works, which this part of the FAQ kind of deals with. It's really fascinating. Some people call it, very innovative. No, none of the other computer biggies are doing anything quite to this extent. Legacy Webinars has 2 webinars up for more guidance in how to do your deep story. DeepStory, your visual storytelling tool, and Make Your Photos Speak with DeepStory. These are on your handout. Lisa Alzo did a review way up front at the beginning, which is interesting to see her perceptions. And this is the handout that should be in the chat, I hope. And please feel free to use any of these resources. So I will stop sharing my screen and take a look at the chat and go from there. I don't think Gianna's on the reference desk. Are you back, Gianna? No. Okay. So I should have asked you to put the questions in Q&A. That would have been easier to separate them. That was my fault. Yes, here's the handout. And let's see if there are any questions. Yes, I'm sorry about the blacked out line on the top. This has happened several times. Neither Gianna or I were capable of getting rid of it. That blacked out part is the black screen actually that has all the controls, like where the Q&A and the chat and the participants and the show captions and all of that is. You can't put it up beyond the top of the screen. You can't get rid of it on the bottom. If anyone has figured out a way to do that, I'd appreciate hearing from it. You can put that in the chat for me. That would be great. When you share the story, are you sharing a video or a link back to MyHeritage? Today, I actually embedded it in the PowerPoint. So I was putting the link in the PowerPoint system itself, but I have done it the other way too, in terms of having MyHeritage Live. In fact, with some smaller groups, I have actually gone live to do an editing process, but because this is in webinar format, I opted to ask you about asking you to look at the two addendums at the end of Evander's sign off, so that you could see that those were added easily after the main part of the deep story ended. So it can actually, for a presenter, it can be done either way. Again, what is the cost to use it? There is no cost. Right now, it's still free. Hopefully will stay that way for a very long time. Can you please list the 3 databases in the chat? If you're referring to question 1 from the Demystifying the 3 Free databases, my top 3 list, it is the Internet Archive. For Massachusetts, it would be the Digital Commonwealth. Other states have their own state digitizing projects, so they would have different names. For Massachusetts, it's the Digital Commonwealth. And the goal ultimately for the United States is that everything digitized would eventually end up in the Digital Public Library of America, or DPLA. So those are the 3 free databases that I said almost all of the research and also most of the visuals came from one of those 3 sources. Again, the PDF is has Gianna loaded several times prior to this point where I am at in the chat, which is about 7:16. So before 7:16, there are several postings for the handout. Did you pay for tombstones? How long can the stories be? Did you pay for tombstones? I'm not sure, Lynn, what that refers to. If you want to clarify that, put that in the Q&A so I can see it quickly. I'm not sure what that means. How long can the stories be? There's no limit right now with My Heritage as to how long they can be. Again, the longer one with Evander was 8.5 minutes to give you an idea. And adding those 2 extra components on, we added another like 15 seconds maybe. I think about 5 to 8 minutes is a good time before people might lose interest. Uh-oh, that means you lost interest in Evander. It's just enough to make others want to ask more questions. That is very true. And certainly you could decide on an earlier break in Evander's story and move some of the story, perhaps everything from Canada on could be in a separate one, just deal with the Scotland part. Yeah, so there's very good options for that, for making them shorter. Can you repost the handout? Gianna, can you repost it again? Thank you. Oh, there it is. Also at 7:17 in PDF format. Is DeepStory available on the free version of My Heritage? If you're talking about My Heritage Library Edition, which is available with your e-card or your permanent card with Boston Public Library for everyone in the state, if you get an e-card and you live in Massachusetts, or you work in the state, you own property in the state, all of those qualify you for a Boston Public Library e-card without physically coming in to get a permanent card. No, because you cannot create a tree on the My Heritage Library Edition, just as you cannot have a tree on Ancestry Library Edition. You can use all the resources, you can download, records and all of that, but neither of those allow, well, can actually function with trees on them. The sign off is a good option to keep an opening to continue. Nice segue to continue family. Okay, Betty, thank you for that. Can library email the handout? Yes, actually, that will be in the, you want to address that, Gianna?
Yeah, so this presentation was recorded. So what will happen is most likely tomorrow at some point, Jill, our head of programming, is going to send out an email with both the recording of the presentation, which you folks who registered will be able to access for a week before it gets taken down. So make sure if you have any extra questions or want to refer back to something, check back in that before it goes away. And we'll also include the PDF or the Word document of the resources that Linda shared tonight. So if you can't get to it tonight or look at it while you're here on Zoom, you'll be able to refer to that after in Jill's email.
Thanks, Gianna. And thank you, Pamela. She says, I like the idea of breaking up a story into chunks or chapters to give viewers breakpoints. In the sample, the break might be when the family leaves Littleton. Yes, and that's basically when Evander stops. And those next two chapters, quote, are about the family when they had moved to the Manchester, New Hampshire area. These are things, though, you need to plan for and think about when you do your storyboard. Um, estimating how long, what you think it's going to take to tell the story that you're thinking about. And then, as we're doing tonight, discussing whether there could be a break someplace, because it doesn't have to be all in one deep story. As long as you have an easy way to get it to the family, and you have many choices through social media, posting it, posting it on private Facebook pages, for example, with our plan page. Here is another copy of the handout for those who joined later. So it's posted again at 7:18 in the chat. Okay. Thanks, Carol, for the well done. Hi, Bob. What is the trick to have the narrator speak in English with a German accent? Okay. In the handout is the link that will also tell you that trick, and it's in the knowledge base that I showed you in one of the slides. So it can be Italian, it can be German, it can be French, it can be in any of the languages that we saw listed in any of the 42 choices of languages. You just, it just won't do it automatically in the DeepStory system. You've got to make it happen. But it's pretty easy steps, actually. Ellen says this was fascinating and something I am not familiar with. Thank you for all the information. Nicely done. Thanks. I am so glad to reach out with you guys because I really do love the product. It is really so easy. You don't have to have a lot of technical skills, so don't worry about that. And the best part is that it's free and it can be really fun for younger kids to see something about their history that's visual, that's colorful. Hopefully you'll be able to use it for your families. Okay, most of the rest, can we re-listen to it? Yes, it's been recorded and you'll get that information in a day or two. Thanks for the compliments, Pam. I'm actually not seeing a PDF. Can we put the PDF in the follow? We're going to put the PDF in the follow-up meeting email too. Yeah, in case you just don't grab it tonight. Thanks, Carol. Excellent presentation. Very clear. Thank you very much. Okay. It is a Mac that could be the issue versus a Windows system. Aha. Well, maybe. Have you had a lot of Mac presenters, Gianna?
I'm not sure, but I that's why I think when I first posted the Word document, I thought maybe some Mac users, the computer.
You
Sorry,
just
can you
cut
hear me
out.
now? All right.
Yes.
So yeah, I would give the PDF a try is kind of more universal to other computers. Um, so yeah, that's what I would recommend. And of course, I'll make sure that Jill maybe posts both the Word and the PDF just in case one format works for others, over the other. So we'll make sure you guys get that.
I wonder if that might be an issue with the black line too of PC versus Mac. But I don't know how
Maybe.
many Mac presenters you may have had with a Mac PowerPoint version.
Right. I'm not sure.
Hmm. We'll have to try to figure that out somehow.
It's a mystery. We'll work
Yes,
on
it
that.
is. Thanks, Kathleen. Would love to have handout and to see the video with my husband at a later date. Yeah, well, you'll be able to do that. Uh, 3 resources again: Internet Archive, Digital Commonwealth, and Digital Public Library of America. And hopefully, I just I just did a whole class with my intermediate class this week. Um, I don't have any soon to happen presentations, but if anyone out there has an organization that you'd like me to present that to, it's one of my favorite presentations because like doing this self-imposed deep story of mine, I also self-imposed myself to be the bringer of news of those 3 databases because I find that even seasoned genealogists as well as seasoned librarians are not promoting those 3 databases like they should be. And they're not encouraging, especially young genealogists, to use them because they're free. We complain all the time about the cost of the commercial databases because every year almost they increase their prices. And that's great if you can afford them. It's also great that we have Ancestry Library Edition, My Heritage Library Edition, and Find My Past Library Edition, although the BPL does not have Find My Past in its list, but has the other 2. So you can use the other 2 for free. But you can't do, you can't do the trees on that, which is kind of the negative. But it is expensive to be a genealogist, and we really need to take advantage of using these other resources when they're there. And it was especially reinforced. I did most of the research for DeepStory during the pandemic because I couldn't get to historical atlases or gazetteers. Um, Even though in normal times I live 2 blocks away from the Boston Public Library. But in the pandemic, we were on our own pretty much. And that's what I did a lot of that is making use of how easy it is to find everything that's been digitized now with the public domain, January 1st, this year's public domain, everything from 1928 and earlier is in the public domain now. So check all of your resources. It's published before 1928. It's very likely out there, at least in one place, but maybe in multiple locations. Okay. Oh, well, it's encouraging to hear other people have the black line problem. Um, Dave Robinson is a good teacher in Western Massachusetts. Of course, most of us are still on Zoom, so I'm here in Boston, but I can do Western Massachusetts as long as you do Zoom or even hybrid. The class I just did was hybrid, and the Genealogy Club was actually physically in their Council of Aging location. And I was in Boston, so we did it hybrid, and it worked pretty well because they had a really good technical setup at the Council on Aging facilities, so that worked well. Charlene says, I'm a huge fan of Family Search, using it from a Family Search affiliated library. Everything is free, and you can get access to more from the affiliated library than from home. Very true, because a lot of since they digitized the microfilm, and some of the providers of that microfilm decided they weren't going to allow vast access to it. A lot of those are materials that we had actually used before when it was on microfilm aren't available unless you're in a family search center now. So good point. Thank you very much. Okay, I think that's it. Unless someone no one answered my question about what item in the deep story you thought cost me money. Anybody want to chime in on that? Put it in the Q&A. There are a few in the Q&A. I'll just take a quick look. One says create individual stories. Can anyone see the deep stories, or can you keep them private? Yes, absolutely. You can keep them private, or just send them or share them to the people you want to share them with. It's not on the general system where other people, it's not a searchable feature, I guess is the best way to say it. Oh, here's one answer. You asked what you had to pay for. I thought that might be the answer. I'm not sure what that means, Lynn. My grandparents were from Ireland and had a brogue. How would we get the accent in English? Well, there's an Irish version of English, so I would take a look at that first and let it do the deep story first, because it may be close enough. There's not like a generic Celtic or Gaelic version, so we kind of have to play with it a little. Is it possible to use several pictures of a person, young, middle-aged, then old, to walk us through his or her life? There can only be one picture of the narrator. I did mention that you can use two narrators. So you could use a young version of the narrator and then an older picture of the narrator. But you'd have to edit it yourself. There's no built-in software editing for that, but can be done if you've got the skills. Can we put the 3 databases in the chat, please? Can you do that, Gianna?
Sure. You know what? Remind me one more time. It was Internet Archive.
Digital Commonwealth and Digital Public Library of America.
Got it.
Okay, Lynn says tombstones. Oh, wait a minute. Pam, you are right. We have a winner. I wish I had a prize to give. The newspaper article came from the British Newspaper Archives, and there was no free access to the British Newspaper Archives. But it didn't matter because it was probably the only way I could prove that they left on that ship at that time, from that location, and got to Quebec on the other side at that time in Quebec, because there are no, well, first of all, they weren't on a passenger ship in 1855. That was a cargo ship. So there are no records anyway. And of course, they weren't aliens because they're going from British Commonwealth to another British Commonwealth. So there wouldn't be alien records. That time period, Canada was not even the Canada we know it of today. It was not united until 1867. So I never really expected to be able to fully confirm that the family that I saw in the manuscript was really my family until I found the newspaper article. So it was more than worth it to pay for that newspaper article. So Lynn, you asked what you had to pay for. I thought it might be the answer. Tombstones as the answer. Oh, the one tombstone picture, and I'm sorry that that is so blurred because that is actually a picture from Find a Grave, and it's not very good to begin with. But never fear, I am going to the homeland in the Eastern Townships for the total eclipse in April. Because the total eclipse line, if you look at the projection of the total eclipse area, it goes through a little section of New Hampshire, then into northern Maine, and then into just that corner of the Eastern Townships around Lake Megantic. So if you find Lake Megantic on the map, that's where the Macs were, and that's where the total eclipse is. And the Presbyterian cemetery that you saw in the slide in the presentation is just 10 miles down from Lake Megantic. And that's where that tombstone picture came from. So the next time I do this, I have to change the picture because I'll have hopefully a decent picture, unless there's a blizzard in April when I'm up there. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for everything. Please make sure you're always thanking people like your trusty librarians, Gianna and Jill, who make this possible. And whenever you get a chance to say thank you to the friends of the library, please do that, and all the dedicated patrons who work on the Friends projects. If
Oh,
it were not for that, I would not be here, most likely.
I'll make sure to pass that along. Thank you so, so much, Linda. This was such a cool and interesting presentation. It's just wild what AI tools we have and what they're capable of. So looking forward to exploring that a little bit more. I hope that you folks enjoyed tonight's presentation. Another reminder, you will get the recording hopefully tomorrow or early next week. So be on the lookout for that. We promise to have as many of the resources available along with the handout as well. So you'll be able to reference that too. And make sure that you get the recording within that week before it's gone. All right, everybody. All right. Thank you so much, Linda.
Bye,
Have a good
guys.
night.
Good night.